Welcome. We've got everybody here today. We've got Mike and Jimmy, and we're also joined by David Hart, who is the man behind the G4 guitar method. So if anyone is able to join us, please feel free to ask any questions, either for us or for David. We're just going to have a bit of a chat today, really. I think it's a great opportunity to pick David's brain and find out a little bit about his background and why he created G4 methods. So, hello, David. Welcome.
Welcome.
Thank you, Vicki. Thank you, guys. Great to see you all.
So, yeah, just give us a background. First of all, I mean, I know your background and I know you've got a very interesting story, but kind of what led you to create the G4 method in the first place?
Okay, well, I started teaching, and this will be the short story, by the way. I'll keep it as short as possible. I started teaching when I was in high school, and I'm 53 now, so that's a long time ago. And basically, I started learning guitar, self-teaching, from about age 14. I had a friend, a very good friend, or we're still very good friends, and I'd go to his house in the afternoon and he had an electric guitar. So that was really my first introduction to actually playing a guitar. Of course, I'd seen many before that. But he encouraged me to take up drums. I took up drums at the local music school, and I did really well on the drums, but I struggled on the guitar. And so after a few years, I ended up working it out that with lessons, I'm going to learn a lot better, a lot faster than if I try and teach myself. So that's why I ended up going to guitar teacher. And I was very fortunate. My guitar teacher was absolutely fantastic. He was just everything that I would have wished and hoped for. Very inspiring, great player, and very organised. And he had a reputation across Sydney, especially as one of the top players at the time. So he sort of took me under his wing, and he knew that I was very serious about learning at that time, and so he started a rock school program. And so that's kind of where I got the first introduction to group learning, because it was that group environment that, I was about 17 at that point, that really took off for me. I went from really being a very average guitar player, if that. I was more of a sort of beginner to just kind of the next level up. And he took me in sort of 6 months from nothing to being able to play some serious material, and then put me and with the other guys into a rock school program, which then gave me the experience of playing in a group, playing live, and so forth. I'd already played live on drums, so I had that experience on stage, but I hadn't done it as a guitarist. But it was also him that inspired me to be a teacher. I felt that he'd given so much to me that, and I don't think it was even a conscious decision at the time. It was really a decision of, this seems the right thing to do. It seems like you kind of pass it on. You pass on the knowledge and you pass on what you do. But it's also a way of keeping yourself in music, because for a lot of musicians, it's very difficult to make a career, especially early on in those early years, to make a career out of playing music, because one, you're up against professionals who are 20 years your senior, who've got much more experience, and two, there's a limited number of gigs, and there's a lot of people who are willing to play for free. So when you're in that kind of industry, it's hard to get started. But we had a band and we did well, and we still did a lot of live work. But I enjoyed the teaching, and I think one of the things, as people often ask the question, what was it about the teaching? I think one of the things about the teaching that really got me in was the fact that I didn't have to work for the audience. It's kind of like your fans are there. They appreciate you. They want to be there. You know what I mean? Opposed to playing a gig and trying to please everyone. So it was just the gig as a gig. It was just a lot easier. And so as far as where the method came from, the method didn't come for years and years later. It was probably after at least 10 years of teaching guitar that I realized that I kind of had these ways that I developed of teaching, but it wasn't systemized in any way. It was just kind of in my head. And as I was hiring teachers, I had a school and I had other teachers working for me. We were all just doing our own thing. And it seemed to me that why not take the best of what we're all doing and bring it together? And and that was kind of the early stages of it. But it was really my brother who came in, and he sort of looked at my business, and he said, you should bottle. I think that was the term you bottle. You should be bottling what you have, because we had so many students. We had our school was the most popular school. It was actually we had more students in our school than any school in the whole of Sydney.
Wow.
And so it was and it wasn't just guitar, it was a range of instruments, but obviously we're doing something right. And that's when he came in and looked at it. He said, you need to bottle this stuff. So I thought, well, okay, so we need to put a method together. So that's when it started, but it took a long time, I have to say. It took another probably 10 years for me to get to G4. And that's for the first G4.
Yeah.
So
yeah, of course, because there's been, I think we've been involved with the G4 network for I think about 2.5 years now, and even in that time there's been quite a few updates and everything, and that's what I really like about it, because it's constantly evolving. So teachers will say, oh yeah, this works, this doesn't work so well, we want to do this better, and then we all have a conversation and improvement. And I know that you've just made an improvement, if you like, to the Junior 1 method, which I think will work really, really well. So yeah.
I think it'll really, because it's based on Kaizen thinking, and what Kaizen is it's a Japanese word, and it's based on the Toyota production system. Mm-hmm. And the idea is that the reason Toyota became the #1 car company in the world was because they took this approach to constantly improving. Now, it wasn't just Toyota, other Japanese companies as well took it all on. It all sort of from World War II, but it is part of the Japanese philosophy generally anyway. For those who obviously don't know me, I spend a lot of time in Japan as well. So I kind of get the best of East and West and combine them in, and that's a lot of what G4 is about. So that constant improvement, someone who was very much of that, and still the company still is Steve Jobs of Apple. Yeah. And a lot of people don't realize that Steve Jobs went to Japan. A lot of his early inspiration came from Japan. He spent time in Kyoto. He met the CEO of Sony, and this is before he was even really known. And he got a lot of advice from Japan. He was actually going to be a monk, believe it or not, Steve Jobs. So he was on the fence of whether do I follow computers or do I become a monk.
Wow! So the iPod may never have been invented.
May never have happened. That's right.
Yeah.
He got married by a Japanese. When he was back in California, a Japanese priest, if you like. Married him and his wife back then, and so a lot of Apple, and so I've kind of inspired a lot by Apple as well. Their products are very well designed. They're very, everything works, and that's really what these kind of things inspire me. It's the same like Toyota. Toyota are the most reliable cars you can get. Sure, you can buy more expensive ones and all the rest of it, but no company, and even if you look through the times when 2008 and other times, earthquakes and tsunamis and all sorts of things that have gone wrong for Toyota over the years, they've still managed to pull a profit through those times. And they have actually put very few employees off. They're one of those companies who rarely sack people. And it usually has to be fairly extreme, even through the tough times. They don't just, whereas you look at all the other car companies, they're all just shedding their employees like business.
Especially now, yeah.
Cool. We are getting some questions in, by the way, by that.
Oh, are we?
Sev's left us a little question.
Okay.
David. You've answered kind of most of it, I think, but she's asked, what inspired you with the method, and what's the rationale behind the order, strategy, and pedagogy?
Oh,
okay, great.
Sev's a teacher, so she would use that word, pedagogy.
That's right. It's a good question. So the whole idea behind the kind of the Kaizen way is that I don't draw assumptions. So what I don't do is say that I have all the answers, or this is my strategy, or this is my way. The idea is that what I look for is what works and what doesn't work. So if we see, when I first developed G4, and I don't mean prior to that, because I had lots of teaching experience prior to that, But just to sort of wind right back where it first started, the first method that I looked at was Suzuki, the Suzuki method. And so I took a lot of that Suzuki thinking into the early stages of G4. And so one of the things that Suzuki did was they do a lot of ear training, which is great. We don't do a lot of that. And if I had my way, I would sort of, say that the kids should go and do 2 years of early development and ear training before even joining G4. So, because that, especially at a young age.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So if you take something like Suzuki, they're quite extreme. They really get you to listen to it, to actually play the music before the child is even born, right? So when they're still inside the belly,
you have to be pretty invested in that as a parent then to make that decision. Yeah.
Well, that's right, and it does work. You can look up a guy online, Rick Beato, his name is Beato, and you'll see that he did a lot of exposure of music to his son. Very early, and it's that exposure that develops the ear early on. It's like a language. So and so we don't have that luxury all the time. We in our position, we have this thing with guitar where a lot of people think you learn later, that you shouldn't start too early, that you should come into guitar at 7, 8 or so forth. But we know that's not true. I mean, I've known that for a long time. Ever since I came across Suzuki, I realized that can't be true, because the violin is a more difficult instrument, especially early on, because there's no frets. It's it's bowed. It's hard to hold. There's a lot of extra challenges there. So as far as just to answer the question, as far as my philosophy is that I'm not going to make assumptions, and that the development of the method is all about getting feedback. Now, in saying that, of course, I have to start with something. I have to start with somewhere. So I started with, I wrote down what I thought, what are the essential skills? But also what I did was that in Australia, we have the AMEB, which is the Australian Music Exam Board, and they had what they call contemporary popular music exams, CPMs. And so the idea was that you could go and do one of those exams on guitar, because most who do guitar don't want to do classical. So and that was the AMEB's role for most of the time. It was just classical exams. So anyone who wanted to do anything outside of that, there was nothing available to them. But then the CPM exams came along, and they came along just at the right time. They came at about the time that I was developing the before G4, when I was sort of working on it. They first appeared, and so I thought, this is great, because the way that they'd done it is they had 4 levels, but they're all called advancing 1, 2, 3, and 4. And the first exam was not suitable for somebody who had only been learning guitar for a year or less. There's no way that they could have done that exam unless they were practicing 3 or 4 hours a day. It was really meant for students who had been learning for a while, who'd finished, the first or second method books that were generally on the shelf. And so that's where I sort of looked at that and said, okay, what do we need to get the students to be able to pass that exam with flying colours? These are the skills they need. These are the 7 skills. These are the requirements. So I kind of worked my way backwards from there. I said, okay, how can I sort of build up to that? So I created a few levels. So I think there was 3 levels in the beginning. And so I had 3 levels, and there was no junior or senior. It was just simply 3 levels that would take them up to doing that first exam. So that's really where it started. But of course, there was also the fact that I'd been using a lot of other method books myself, Levitt, and, I've been doing classical, jazz, rock. So I'd sort of covered the different method books in my own teaching, my own learning. So I'd kind of seen, but the other thing was that I ran a music school for all kinds of students. So I had piano teachers, I had violin teachers, woodwind teachers. We were doing a lot of school stuff. So I had Emma's, as you know Emma well. Emma does all the woodwind. She did the woodwind with me, and so there was a lot. She helped a lot in that area. And I noticed some differences with guitar students compared to other students who would to go through the levels. They would do really well on the exams. So I learned a lot from those teachers as well. So being exposed to lots of different teachers in different areas allowed me to sort of draw from those areas, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really interesting point. In fact, I think this ties in with a question that you had, Jimmy, about the grades.
Yeah.
Because we have a similar thing here. for guitar. I think there are a couple of examples, Rock School and Trinity Rock and Pop, and that's often what people do. But, you know, we found that the G4 method is a great primer for those. And often we have parents, because I think often parents don't know what the G4 method is, they've never heard of it. So sometimes, you know, it's difficult to kind of get that point across that we're not just going to put them in at grade 1 and they'll start there. So Jimmy, did you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
I guess I don't know what generally the exams kind of consist of in Australia, but I feel like a lot of things learnt for some of the exams can often just be to tick boxes, and it's not really internalized. And I guess, like, what's your kind of take on it? For me, I like the G4 method because it actually gets students to remember things that they've done and kind of move forward with their playing. But I just wondered if you could kind of elaborate on like how you kind of feel the G4 method is kind of designed to like help students, and like why you would probably recommend it as opposed to just doing the grades, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I totally agree with you. A lot of the exams were set up more like just checklists, and teachers would sort of, you know, train their students up to be able to perform whatever was required on that checklist. So a lot of the exams or the, you know, the Trinities and so forth, things have evolved in a lot these days, but a lot of them, especially in the early stages, were not methods. They were just simply, this is the requirements.
Yeah.
And in Australia, that was how it was anyway. So yeah, you need to be able to do this, and this. We're not going to tell you how to do it or how much to practice or any of that. You're going to have to work that out with a teacher. So the thing that G4, the underlying thing is about developing behaviors. So developing how you should practice for the long term, because being a musician is not about just learning it and then switching off. It's a constant evolution. I think most musicians that you speak to, no matter how old they are, you know, I even spoke to my teacher not that long ago, and he's been playing, you know, he's, you know, in his late 60s, and he's been playing since he was a kid. He says, I'm still learning new things all the time. I'm still practicing the things that I need to do every day. So that never stops. So what we're really trying to do is say, this is how you should practice. And that's really what the G4 method is about, is developing students in how to practice. It's not just what to practice. We've got that because we want to make it easy for them, especially in the early stages. This is what you need to practice. But we also want to talk about how to practice, and even why to practice. Why does it matter? So, you know, if you take something like, you know, the way to practice chords, we're teaching that in steps. We're saying, so if you look at a typical, when I started, you'd get a book of songs and it'd have the chords, but there was nothing telling you how to play the chords or how to practice them or how to get good at them. So there was no method behind it.
These are the chords you need to play these songs, but and it would just be like, oh, well, how do I put my foot? How do I do that? You know, that's obviously the G4 method addresses that. Yeah.
Well, if I just add to that quickly is that I've also looked at anywhere where skills are used, motor skills, such as sports, and it's the same kind of theory in just about everything. And that is that when you're developing motor skills, it's about doing repetitions. It's about doing, you know, and tweaking it and turning it. And, you know, there's a book called Practice Perfect, I think it's called. And he goes into a lot of the science in there. But, you know, if you look at, you know, say for you guys in England, you look at football players that, you know, when they practice the game, they don't just get on the field and kick the ball around during practice sessions. What they do is they do drills. They work on small drills where they'll kick a ball in a particular way, maybe thousands of times, just to get that kick right. They'll do other maneuvers, and they really drill down on it. And I often use the example of you know, John Wooden in the US, the famous basketball coach, and how he used to coach his players without a basketball. He would get them to practice basketball without a basketball. And you know, it's like pilots who learn in simulators. You know, some of them, most of the best pilots do more simulation than they do real flying. They're doing that extra time. So there's a lot of this, you know, in skill development of drills and isolation. That's what you're trying to do, drills and isolation. I know they can get boring for kids, so you kind of we're sort of balancing that between what they should do and you know, kind of what they want to do. It's kind of like when you know, you should eat vegetables and you should eat healthy foods, none of this junk food. But hey, we can't just not give you junk food ever, because that's kind of, you know, in today's world, it's like being cruel. You gotta let them have a bit of fun.
That brings me neatly to actually a question that we've had from one of our parents, which is about, if I can find it, like, how can a parent make the learning process fun, like particularly for younger kids? And I know you've written lots on this, and you know, there's the G4 parent guide. If anyone wants a copy of that, I'm happy to send that over. But yeah, I know you did a lot of that with your own daughter, didn't you, when she started? So can you give any advice for parents on, we got to practice the skills, but how do we make it fun for the kids?
Yeah, look, I think it's a great question, because the thing is that every child is different and every parent is different. So, you know, sometimes the advice that I would give to one parent for their child is going to be different that I would give to another parent for their child. So the best thing I can say on this, and I will kind of, you know, give a few other examples, but the best thing I can say is you need to experiment. You need to find out how to make it fun for your child. There's no book or recipe, just do it this way and your child is guaranteed to enjoy practicing guitar. It's probably not going to happen. What you need to do is experiment with different things to find what works for them. So, you know, for example, with my daughter, what I would do is that I didn't force her to practice if she wasn't in the mood. But I would always make sure that we started. So I'd say, sweetie, if you don't want to do it after a minute or 2 minutes or 5 minutes, whatever, I would say, you know, after a few minutes, if you don't want to do it tonight, that's okay. So I always had that kind of, well, you don't have to do it if you don't want to, but all I'm asking is that you give it a go. And what would happen is sometimes she'd want to practice and other times she wouldn't. And so I didn't push it. So I didn't, because what some parents do is that they'll push their children into practicing every night. And here's the thing, again, for some children that works. Some children will obediently respond to their parents, yes, mum, yes, dad, I'll practice like you tell me to. I don't want to, but I'll do it because you told me. But other children will literally throw the guitar, you know, across the room and scream and carry on. And so if you're trying to tell that parent, make your child do practice no matter what, then you're giving them the wrong advice. You're setting it up for, you know, a disaster. Whereas with other parents, that'll work. It will work. So you know, your child might not want to practice every night, but still do it anyway. And for some kids, they'll just accept that and go on with it. So that's why I say you've got to experiment and you've got to be flexible and you've got to understand the dynamics sometimes between the parent and the child as well. There's a different dynamic between often the father to the child and the mother to the child. So sometimes they can take turns, all right, or the father can help with practice tonight rather than the mother. So, but we've seen, you probably experienced this yourself, you've seen it with students where a student doesn't do very well under one teacher, but then you swap them over to another teacher and they do really well, or vice versa. And that's just because we have different ways of doing things and approaching things. And it's the same with students. It's the same with, you know, if I go from it, and I often, because, you know, we're in business, so I often kind of come from the business advice as well, is that when you're in business, you don't try and please everyone. And so what you do is you look after the people who want what you do or appreciate what you do, rather than trying to make a product that suits everyone, because that's often a recipe for disaster. So you know, if you think, again, if I go back to the Apple example, Apple weren't trying to please price-conscious people. You know, they've always been more expensive, and people who are not Apple people, so to speak, will often say, "Oh, it's overpriced." You know, I can buy the same stuff for half the price over here; it's just as good. So, but your loyal Apple supporter will say, "No way, I wouldn't buy anything but Apple." So
Yeah.
So you've got to make sure that you're matching things. It's all about matching. And so if my advice is to any parent is, if you're struggling with your child, to get them to practice, to get them inspired, the first thing that I would do is take the practice down to as a small amount as they're willing to do on a daily basis. So just talk to your child and say, how much would you be willing to do? And if they say, I don't know, 5 minutes. Okay. How about we just start with 5 minutes a day? How does that sound? And then if they can commit to that, then great. Now, if you get down to where they don't want to do it at all, they say 0, well, then it might be time for a break in that case. If they're just not willing to do any practice at all. Yeah. But often it's just, and just to give you an example, a recent example for me, with my daughter, I couldn't even get her to go for a walk. Right? She didn't want to walk. Oh, that's boring. I don't want to go walking, because especially with COVID and everything, we'd been, inside, and I said, you've got to get out. Now this is going back about 6 or 8 weeks ago. And I said to her, all right, well, what if we go for a run? And she's, and I said, you can go at your pace, whatever you like, run, walk. You do it at your pace. All we need to do is just go for 5 minutes. That's all. And so she agreed. And so we went there. And now, we're up to running 3K a day. All right. So she does walk and run it, but she runs most of it. And around here, it's very hilly. So she's running hills. But not only that, she's got 2 friends that have joined us as well. So now I've got these 3, 11-year-old girls and myself, and I take them out for a jog every afternoon.
Fantastic.
Right? So I let her do it on her terms, and I did it on, again, using the Kaizen philosophy, start small. And that's the main thing I'd recommend to parents. If there's one takeaway, is start small, start at a size that your child is willing to start and accept. And on those days, they'll go a little bit more, great. On the days they don't want to do any more than their 5 minutes, that's fine as well. But just make it daily. That's the most important part.
Great. Yeah, fantastic. Jimmy, did we have any other questions?
Not that I can see. Not in the group now.
Okay, Mike, did you want to ask your question?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to kind of jump on the back of what you were saying, David, as well, that is something that's really close to my heart as well, because I tried a few different instruments when I was growing up, when I was a kid, and it was always the pressure from the teachers of, you have to do this. And I even had a teacher when I was learning tuba say, oh, you're never going to do anything in life with this, because you're not practicing. And my personality is one of those kids where I just turned off then. I won't do it then. And I was very, very, very lucky that my first teacher was just no pressure. It was like, really, you do it at your own pace, and if you still enjoy it, keep coming, but there's no pressure. He's never going to be upset. And for me, that was perfect. But my mistake when I first started teaching was I had that approach with all my students, and then a bunch of them never ever practiced because I didn't pick the right personalities. So yeah, that's absolutely brilliant. My question, because what's really close to me as well, is kind of writing music and being creative with the guitar, and it's like passing it on, like you were saying with your teacher, and then you passing it on. I wanna pass that on like a gift to all of my students as well. So what have you done with students in the past to kind of make them, start being creative and start writing things themselves?
And that's a great question. And it's funny because some people don't know kind of my backstory and what got me started. And very simply is that I grew up until about the age of 14 when I picked up the first instrument, which was drums. My father, he hated TV. He thought TV was a waste of space. And so he wouldn't allow TV. And so we just had to listen to music. That was what we did but my parents separated when I was 7. So I did have TV at home with my mother, but then I'd go to my dad's in the holidays and weekends and all that, and there was no TV. So I'd just sit by the record player and go through all these records. And I also had young parents, so they were only 20 years older than me. So they were right into the latest music, especially my dad. He was into, all the rock and roll, Led Zeppelin, and, you name it, Pink Floyd, everything. Nice. So I was getting right into it, and it was really the creative burn in me that got me playing music. I never picked up the guitar to be a guitarist. It was never about being a guitar player for me. It was always about creating and writing, and that's what I wanted to do. So, you know, I go back to, you know, I had 2 tape recorders that had little microphones on them, and I would record on one, and then I'd play that, like the drumming of that, and then have the guitar and then record it on that.
Yeah, I know that. Yeah.
You know that one. You can relate, and it was, by the end of it was like shh.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can hardly hear anything. But that's the creative drive. You'll do anything to be able to. And then the Fostex, little 4-track Fostex came along, and I was like, wow, these are amazing. You know, I can write and record. So so that's really what kept me going, because I felt like I wasn't getting very far on guitar. It was a real struggle in those early years, but it was that desire to want to compose and create. So as far as what do I tell students, I just say to them, look, there are some core skills you need. It's like a language. You need these core skills to be able to express yourself. You can't express yourself in a language if you can't speak it. If you don't know the basic words of any language, then you're not going to be able to express yourself very well. So what G4 is about is that I'm not going to tell you how to be creative or what to create. I'm going to give you the skills to create or to play music. But the creativity, and also, you know, as far as a teacher, I kind of separated that out where I do workshops or do different things outside of the method, because in creativity, again, it's kind of a hard one to teach on one hand, but it's also about I think being inspired to want to create. You've got to be inspired, because let's face it, some musicians are just not inspired to be creative. They just want to be technicians. They just want to be able to execute. They don't have a desire to be creative. So again, I didn't want to force that onto students. Again, it's that thing. I'm not going to force you to be creative. I'm not going to tell you have to be creative. But it's for me, it was a great thing to do. So it depends on the individual.
Of course, but it also comes back to the grades question, which Jimmy asked, because of my experience of teaching students who have always learned grades, is they learn the tab, and it's like painting by numbers. And so they can read it and they can play it with no understanding, or very, very little understanding of actually why it is good and what makes it good. And after 2 years of doing the G4 method, the students actually getting a deep understanding of why things are and so then it's a brilliant tool for them being able to, because the workshop I did, just to give you an idea, was just with chords and then arpeggios, and picking out which note from the arpeggio we like for melodies. So it takes that kind of core skill, which if you just learn the grades and learn the tab, then you would have no idea about any of these things.
Yeah, exactly. It gives you a much deeper understanding. And also what you said as well about listening to stuff and being inspired. I mean, that was something that we spoke about with Arian a couple of weeks ago, you know, when he suddenly, well, from my perspective, he suddenly turned into a metaler, but I guess that must have been a gradual process. But yeah, like he found the music that he liked, and that was what was inspiring him to continue. And I think listening to music, whatever music you're into, like, it doesn't matter, just, you know, pick what you like, and then that, just by doing that, is going to inspire you as well.
Well, I think another important thing is that we sometimes think that we can inspire them musically, and that can happen. But I think there's a kind of an X factor there, or an unknown, I should say, because I saw an interview with Steve Lukather, the Toto guitarist, and one of his sons hates rock music. He just hates it. He only wants, and he only loves classical, right? So, like, go figure. He's the guy's kind of, you know, one of the most famous rock players in the world. His son just doesn't want a bar of it, right?
But that's always the way, isn't it? Like, you know, your kids are never going to get into what you're into. That's funny.
It's just and that's the thing, is that inspiration can come from anywhere, and I don't know that it can be forced. But what I do say to students is if you like a certain style, or you relate to a certain style, then start listening to lots of other things around it. Okay,
Yeah.
so if you take someone like Hendrix, who was starting to move into jazz, hanging out with Miles Davis and that sort of stuff. So, and Miles Davis, who was running to jazz but listening to rock, getting into listening to blues and rock and getting out of his comfort zone. So that's what I would often say to students is that you need to broaden your horizons, or you don't need to, but I encourage you to if you want to be creative, because most creativity in the world comes from putting two things together. It taking two, almost opposite sometimes, and blending them. That's where we get creative. We don't get creative by sticking to one narrow field. Technically, you might get very good, but creativity tends not to. And that's you'll learn that in the book Range that you mentioned earlier, right?
Yes,
that's exactly what he's talking about.
Yeah, I'm only about 40 pages in so far, but this idea that by having like a broader experience of things kind of helps you to to become better at your thing that you're doing.
Well, he uses examples of musicians in it, and it's really interesting when he gets to that part. But the idea is that a lot of the best musicians do more than one instrument. Right? They dabble in different instruments. I know for myself as a creative, musician, then I can play some keyboard. I wouldn't insult keyboard players by saying I'm a keyboard player, but I can get around it. I can get what I need out of it. I can play some drums. I can play some guitar. I can sing a little bit. You know what I mean? And even play with strings and other arrangements. So I don't just stick to guitar. I'm not just a guitar purist. Nor am I a style purist. I'm not going to stick into one narrow style.
Well, it makes the whole thing much more interesting and enjoyable, I think, doesn't it?
Yeah. And it gives you epiphanies. And by bringing those two things together, you suddenly have these moments of, wow, that's cool. Where did that come from? Well, it's the combination of different things, different influences.
Cool. I'm aware we've gone over time a bit. Jimmy, are there any questions in the Facebook group, just quickly?
No, Sev said thank you, and she's off to go teach herself now.
Okay, fair enough. Cool. All right. Well, David, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been really, really interesting talking to you. I hope the students have found it interesting, or will find it interesting when they watch it.
One final question.
Yeah, go on, Jimmy.
How many minutes do you practice a day?
How many minutes do I practice a day?
Right now,
Well, it depends on the day,
or
but
hours.
I will. Or hours, yes. There's two. I break the practice up, and this is really important, into two categories, and that's purposeful, focused practice versus just having a bit of fun, right? Kind of practice. So I'd probably do about an hour of each.
Nice.
So I'll make sure that I have that 1 hour of focused practice to try and develop something and be in my stretch zone, to be working on something that I can't quite do. And right now I'm doing a bit of jazz. So I'm learning a Joe Pass piece. And,
which one?
Hang on. I've completely forgotten the title. Hang on a sec. I will tell you.
Jimmy is our jazz guru, so no wonder he's excited.
I don't know about that.
Yeah, I noticed on the thing he went into it a little bit. Here we go. Autumn Leaves, of course.
Autumn Leaves.
Yeah, classic.
Yeah, so and look, I don't do a lot of jazz. I do a bit of jazz, and I've been in and out of it over the years, and I love the sounds. I was never one to sort of follow jazz players that closely, or I really like George Benson. At one stage, especially when in my 20s, I followed him for a while, but I go back to it every now and again to look for sort of inspiration, and that's what I do. Is I kind of get into things just to find some new ideas.
Perfect.
That's great.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, we will leave it there for today. Thank you again, David. We'll say goodbye now.
Thank you.
And
Thank
Jimmy.
All right,
you, buddy.
I'll see you guys later.
I think,
Thanks,
thank you
Meg.
very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you all. Nice to meet you, Mike. Nice to meet you, Jimmy.